Well, hello and welcome to the webinar today, From the Home to the Landscape. My name is Carrie Berger and I'm your host and the manager of Oregon State University's Extension Fire Program. This webinar is part of a series of webinars on fire aware, fire prepared, meant to help prepare us for wildfire season. More specifically, this series aims to address preparedness at three levels: the individual, community, and the landscape. Today, we will review the principles of defensible space, the home ignition zone, and practical steps you can take to prepare for the next fire season. If you missed any of our previous webinars, don't worry, we've recorded them all. I will also record this webinar and post the recording to our webinar page and on the Forestry and Natural Resource Extension YouTube channel. I'll go ahead and put those links in the chat box in just a minute because first I'd like to cover some logistics. So along with recording this webinar session today, I am also live streaming on the Extension's Facebook page. And for those of you tuning in to the webinar on Zoom, your audio has been muted. If you're having audio troubles and are connected to your computer's audio, I suggest just simply hanging up and dialing in with your phone instead. You can always post a question in the chat window if you are having technical difficulties. And then again, to help with audio issues like previous weeks, I'm also using the closed captioning feature. And so hopefully you all are seeing that at the bottom of your screen. If you do not want to see that captioning, simply go to live transcript, which is at the lower right-hand portion of your screen, and just hide those subtitles. Then finally, if you have a question on the information that is being presented, please type your question into the Q&A window. We have limited time, but we will do our best to answer your questions live. And if you don't catch all the information presented, please don't worry. I'll provide all the resources and links mentioned during the webinar on our fire program website, and I'll even follow up with an email just to be sure you get that information. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce you to Jake Putney. Jake is an extension forester in Baker and Grant counties. And Jake, whenever you're ready, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Carrie. So as Carrie mentioned, I'm Jacob Putney. I'm the extension forester for Baker and Grant counties with the Forestry and Natural Resources program. And I'm going to be co-hosting today's Wildfire Wednesday session. I'm joined today by John Rizza, who's going to be presenting and serving as a moderator for a panel discussion we're going to be having today. And also Ariel Cowan and Aaron Groth, who are also regional fire specialists with the fire program. They're going to be helping out with moderating and the Q&A box as well. So as Carrie mentioned, today's session is titled From Home to the Landscape Fall Edition. This session is going to cover defensible space principles, and we'll build on the session from this past spring. We're also going to be joined by three panelists who have graciously agreed to join us today and share their experiences around these topics. So after that, we have some time reserved for a panel Q&A discussion between our speakers and you all tuning in today, and John and myself will moderate that session. So fire season may be over, but fall is an opportune time to complete projects and check those items off the to-do list in order to prepare for fire seasons to come. So with that, I want to turn it over to John Rizza, the Northeast Oregon fire specialist, who's going to tell you more. Welcome, John.
Thanks, Jake. All right, let's get going here. We got a lot of information to cover, and I really want to provide the space for our panelists to be kind of sharing their experience with you. So real briefly, we're going to go over a few of the principles related to defensible space. So last session, we talked about the home hardening and some priorities there. We're not going to really touch on that, but Irene is going to kind of connect the outside right up against the house basically for you when she comes on here shortly. So we have the three zones that are recommended as part of your home ignition zones for treatments to help increase your resilience to any sort of wildfire pressure. The immediate, that's right up against your house. 0 to 5 is kind of the rule of thumb for that area, where we're creating that ember resistant zone by removing flammable and combustible materials away from that zone. Basically an envelope around your home. So things that don't burn work well in that space. As we move to the next zone, that intermediate zone, we're just the next piece out, 5 to 30 feet is a recommendation on that. We're going to keep it lean. clean, and green. So space out our trees, remove dead and dying materials, thin out those materials that may be decadent and need some of that cleanup. Keep that irrigated ground against your house. If you have a way to irrigate the grass, keep it nice and green. Shorter than 4 inches is the recommendation there. Decrease the amount of opportunity for fire to move from the ground to the canopy or in between the canopies of trees. So spread those things out, clean things up, really get it looking lean, clean, and green. I want you to remember that. The extended zone, that's that 30 to 100 foot area. So the further out you go, the better. 100 is a minimum. I would want to go to the fence line or talk to my neighbors and keep going the best I can beyond that. That's where we're going to look at reducing those fuels, thinning, pruning, and separating the canopies of those trees, lifting those trees up and getting some space between the ground and the canopy of that tree. Make sure we're promoting healthy, vigorous plant materials. We don't have to create a moonscape out there, but we can sure do a lot to reduce the ladder fuels and removing those small materials that may carry fire from the ground into the canopy. And then we can spread those canopies out. So those are really key pieces of what we're doing out there. You know, might not be what you do on the back 40, but might be a little bit less than what you do right close to the house, but really trying to focus on starting at the home and working your way out from the home to improve your opportunity to be resilient from fire. And so just briefly want to touch on what actually is some adequate thinning. And there's so many resources out there, but I wanted to touch on a few quick principles related to this. So what trees should I leave? Well, we mentioned that earlier. Create opportunities for those vigorous, growing, and large, healthy trees that are resilient to fire. Ponderosa, good, strong fir, strong barked Doug firs and larches, things like that. Reduce the opportunity of those trees that are acting as ladder fuels underneath those. Always ask how far away should they be spaced. There are some rules of thumb, and one of them is if you increase them between the spacing between the trees to being one tree width apart is really good. So if there's a tree here and a tree there, get that one that's in between those two to create that spacing between the canopies so the canopies aren't touching. Or have a clump of trees and reduce the touching of the canopies from trees that are around that clump if you have 3 or 4 trees you really want to keep. When should I thin is another question that people ask us a lot. If you're in a place where you may have Ips beetles or other insect issues, there are really great resources available that help you understand when the best time to thin, when the best time to treat those materials are, because just because we rearrange that fuel doesn't accomplish our goals. We also have to remove that fuel from the situation by us treating those fuels at the appropriate time, whether it be hauling it off to a chipping place or chipping them on site or burning them or whatever pathway you choose to do there with those. So those are some really great resources that we'll put on the resource link to help you understand when the best time is in your given situation. Different trees have different insects, and there are some different ways to treat for those opportunities. So I want to just briefly touch on, to wrap this thing up in the next couple minutes here, is we think that thinning is a science, but it also is an art. So you can't just thin to a certain spacing across the landscape. Typically, we have trees that are in clumps, we have openings, we have gaps, we have different size trees. And so what are the objectives of thinning? Well, we want to do a lot that helps to reduce those fuel opportunities. So when we do a thinning, we actually increase the surface fuel. So we have to do some sort of abatement to that surface fuel that we've put on the ground. We've rearranged the fuel from up here in the canopy down to the ground. Well, we still have to treat it. We also want to work on decreasing those ladder fuels, so creating space between things, and then decreasing the contact between the crowns. So opening those stands up so that they're not touching one another is really important. Additionally, the thinning beyond your boundary is really important. I'm not saying hop across the fence and go thin your neighbor's property, but What I am saying is it's an opportunity to have a conversation with your neighbor, whether it be a private landowner or a public agency or organization, someone who's across that. And so here's a diagram of an area where we had some thinning and slash abatement in the early close to the photo here in the beginning, bottom part of the photo. And as we went, you can see basically there's a fence line right there where we have an unthinned area to the north of that. We're looking north in this picture. So that's an opportunity for that landowner to potentially invite the neighbor to have a conversation when their equipment is in there to do that. Now that's not always going to work, and that's okay. We understand that. But putting some opportunities up front there, you have a conversation, it can be a good thing. Not everybody's going to be receptive to that, and that's fine, and we understand that. If we provide that opportunity and it's not the right one, then we move on and make sure we do the best we can on our side of the fence. Maybe once they see that, they'll be interested in looking at how do we deal with this? And we liked what that result was, who'd you use, having those conversations. That shouldn't stop you. And we understand that slash treatment is the key to all of this. Rearranging the fuel doesn't accomplish the real objective of being resilient over the long term. Instead, treating that slash after we do it. And so you can see on the upper left-hand corner here is a thinning and a lodgepole mixed conifer stand. You can see a lodgepole and some spruce. There's a larch in there. We did a thinning, so we lifted those canopies a little bit, but we have slash on the ground. Well, we're going to put a prescribed fire on that particular piece. And so this was right before the fire. The fire was conducted this fall. We'll go out and get some more photos for next time. We can pile it and burn it like you see on the upper right-hand side. This picture down in the bottom, they actually did some pile and burning, and they did some grinding and chipping of material and left behind a really nice looking stand, good crown spacing, reduced some of that ladder fuel, kept the diversity in the stand structure, and really spaced things out. So really good objective. We're able to actually harvest some material out of there to provide some compensation for doing this work and achieve that increase in fire risk reduction. And in the bottom picture here, this is a little prescribed burn test plot we were working on. So we do a test fire in the morning to make sure that our fire is within prescription. And then we're able to go ahead and get some slash treated using prescribed fire on the ground. The last thing I want to address before we shift gears here is let's consider the treatments need to be adjusted for the slope that you're on. The steeper the slope, the larger the treatment should be, because we know that fire, when it moves up a slope in a wildfire type situation, will preheat the fuels above it. So we want to create more space for that fuel to get back down on the ground, not be transmitting from canopy to canopy across the trees to a place where we can handle it, where it's a better situation for our suppression resources and where we can potentially be able to move equipment up and down the roadway. So just a couple examples to think about slope and how important it is to adjust your treatment for slopes. If my home was at the top of this picture on the right-hand side, I'd want to have that fuel break pretty good distance as far as I could possibly get down that hill so that that fire could not carry across the canopy, be putting embers towards my home or my structures, and really help get that fire into a place where we can potentially address it. So that's about all I have just as an overview. Again, we did a lot of this stuff back in the spring and we have other resources online, but we're going to shift gears and kind of move into our panelist discussion at this point.
Yeah, thank you, John. That was a lot of great information. With that, I want to welcome our first panelist, Irene Jerome. So Irene has done a lot of great fire prevention work for Grant County, and I'll let her share her experiences.
Well, I'm honored to have such a broad group with us today. So hopefully it'll help some. As Jacob said, I work for Grant County in Oregon, which is John Day Canyon City's the epicenter, if you will, if that'll help you locate where I am. And I've been doing it for quite a long time. So I'm just got a little program here on fire prevention based on, this is all actual photos from Eastern Oregon and my experience. So when we think about the home ignition zone and that 5 feet that John was talking about, you need to remember that your home itself is fuel. It's fuel, and that's how fire would see it if it came along. So the photo I have here is actually a property that my husband and I own. That way I can talk freely about it. And you'll see that it's on top. The house there's on a little knob. And then we have a shed with big solar panels on it. And that's been up probably 10 years now. So even though it doesn't show too much from the photo, it's actually fairly well in pretty good position as far as fire. But I'm going to talk about the weaknesses if John will put the next slide up. Okay, so this is when we first built the home. So it's got a metal roof. The foundation is tall, so there's a lot of cement around it. We cut the grass all around it. We thinned the trees out. But the real weakness of this structure is those two decks. Ember wash is it's amazing how powerful that is and how much destruction it causes. And that has me worried. It still does. So we don't have much under the bottom deck. We try to keep that clean, but sometimes during the summer, the main deck there, the middle one, gets filled with clutter, which is not good if you have to have a fire person come out. And the upper deck, the soffits, the rafters aren't boxed in, and there's some holes. So if you had a big conflagration, which we've had in that area, we've been evacuated, and we had embers that washed in there, could very, very easily burn that house down. And we haven't been able to get insurance on it because of where we're located. So I'll be very frank about it. I'm still struggling with what to do with that, especially that upper deck. The lower one we can keep clean. Treating the boards will help. It is wood, but treating it'll help. But we'll see. So I'm working on that yet. Perhaps I'll come back for phase 2 when I figure out what to do. And we do have a road clear around the house, and it's got good access. We're in a rural fire department there, and then we also have ODF, and this is in Baker County, Oregon. So next slide. Let's talk about some more stuff. All right, so you do not want anything that'll allow open flame to touch your structure. And even though our house up there has concrete and it's like 3 feet high, we still don't want anything with open flame touching that home. This house, I believe it's either in Will or Gilliam County, northwest of where I live here. And a firefighter took it before he put the fire out. That innocent looking little grass fire would have burned that home down. I mean, it's just absolutely critical. There's nooks, there's crannies, there's loose, sometimes there'll be some sort of a looseness in like the siding on the house. It's extremely insidious. So like John was saying, look at your home in that 5-foot ignition zone and just make sure that there's no way that open flame could touch that house. So, and sometimes it's surprising things. So next slide. So this home is in Corral Gulch. That's one of our Firewise communities here. It's a really well-hardened home, as we say, but there is one weakness to it. And that weakness is, if you look on the left side of the picture, you'll see a wooden fence. And that wooden fence is attached to the house. And as the Australians say, if it's attached to the house, it's part of the house. And so that could actually burn that home down, because the fire starts burning on that fence and it would burn right up to the house. It's like a wick or a cord or whatever. And that's happened over and over and over in these fires we've had in the wildland urban interface. So our suggestion is, okay, if you have a fire and you have to evacuate, just open that gate there on the left and leave the gate open so that you don't have a trail of fuel to the home. So next. Also, subtle things are prone to that ember wash. So we're a little bit real estate poor, my husband and I. This is also a home we own. He's from Michigan, so it's on Lake Huron. And when we were back there this spring, because there's pine trees around the home, I looked up and there we had a bird nest built next to that gutter. And yes, if you had a big ember wash, and they've had those in Michigan, that bird nest could light on fire and burn that home down. I mean, it seems impossible, but we'll go to the next slide and I'll show you some examples. So we had in 2015 the Canyon Creek Complex fire. It was at that time we lost the most homes in that fire. It was the record for the state of Oregon. That's changed since the Labor Day fires on the west side. But this home is up in the Corral Gulch area, and those folks were evacuated. One home was lost up there, and that home was one where the landowner chose not to take the advice of home hardening from the firefighters. We did a little pilot project up there. I thought that was, proofs in the pudding. The one house that chose not to do the work burned down. The others were saved. So these folks, they'd been evacuated for quite a while, and they came back to their house. And when they got up there, and this was, several days after, the fire had passed through quite a while, they got home, and what they discovered was in that planter, it was wet, had petunias in it. There was open flame against the side of the home, and the embers had landed between that planter and the house and started a fire. Next slide. And there you can see it, burn marks. It's I think it's larch siding they have on there. So even if it wasn't larch, you still wouldn't want fire next to your home because something could get up under that siding and into the sheathing. These are some of the lessons we've learned. So they threw it down and they came home. Had they not gone home, that house still would have burned after the flame front was long gone. So next slide. So these are from the Canyon Creek Complex as well. The reason I show this slide is it's just one of the many homes that burned. Is if you look at that, the roof is on fire, and it had some kind of it had either metal or comp. So it had the roof itself was good material, but you'll notice that none of the trees are on fire. So next slide. Same thing here. We had a lot of wooden bridges across Canyon Creek. So you look, and the bridge is on fire and nothing else is on fire. That's ember wash that started that. Same thing up on the hill. You can see the home out in the meadow there. It's not on fire, but something up in the back is on fire. That was another home, I believe, that burned. So it's so powerful and so insidious and hard to grasp, but the threat is very real. Next slide. Yeah, that's vinyl siding, just in case anyone has that. Vinyl siding does not do well with fires. Next slide. One last thing I wanted to bring up here. One of the things we also learned on the Canyon Creek Complex is that if any kind of an open door or open bay in an outbuilding, in a woodshed, you need some way to enclose that. A tarp, it doesn't have to be anything fancy, so that those embers don't blow in when you have if you have a big wildfire with ember wash or any kind of a fire. Another structure fire would do it. So this home is up in North County, and I asked the folks, I said, it's really good you have your wood away from your house, your firewood, you can see it in there on the left side of their garage, but I said, you have no way to enclose that. And they said, no, it's a breezeway, and that's what breezeways are supposed to do, is be open. But the issue is that place that little fire shed, wood shed would get on fire in no time. And then the structure would be on fire, and the home is just off the picture to the left. And when buildings stop burning, they burn extremely hot. So then you get structure to structure fires. So any way to close something up, like I said, just even a tarp would do to prevent those embers from entering those open areas. Next slide. And, finally, I've shortened this tremendously to make room for lots of other folks today, but this is a home at it's in the Pine Creek Firewise community, and this home survived. And you see how black the trees are around it. It's up on a point, it's up that slope like John was talking about. It had fire below it, had fire all around it, but the folks had done the precautions and followed the guidance, and that home survived. And I don't know if they had an engine up there on that or not, because it's it's not a good road for fire engines to get up. It's not, you have to go through Forest Service land. It's steep, there's switchbacks, but because of their due diligence, their home survived. So that's what I had for today.
Yeah, thank you so much, Irene, for sharing. That was great stuff. I want to welcome our next panelist, who is Jeremiah Marsh.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. I'm glad everybody's here. And this is a topic that's really I'm passionate about. I am a supervisor for a hand crew. I work for service. In my real job, I am also the fire chair on my local HLOA, Homeowners Association community as well, and an active partner in FireWise implementation and planning, and good forestry practices and emergency planning. And so I just want to elaborate what everybody else has been talking about and what John said earlier about reaching out to your neighbor and building community partnerships. Because in my mind, I think that from my experiences, what I see on a lot of these fires is that if communities can get together and come up with a collaborative agreement about what sustainable forest health looks like to them, and it's such a complex topic, and I'm just going to help try to cover some ground on that, just to cover ground. It's so diverse, there's so much spatial diversity, so I can't cover it all. But the biggest thing about wildland fire is there's two things that drive wildland fire: mid-flame wind speed and fine fuels. Okay, so a lot of overstory trees, around your house and stuff like that, that you think, following FireWise practices is definitely, that's something that should be followed. What I'm trying to relay is when you get outside of that perimeter of your home and you think about sustainable forestry practices, you don't have to clear cut or cut down every tree. Leave the overstory trees. A lot of these areas are second and third story generation trees. And what we're looking at is limbing and pruning and try to create spatial within the space within the trees themselves, so that if you do have a ground fire, it can be easily managed and it won't get up into the canopy, which causes the ember washouts from and causes some of these fires to start with homes. Okay, so this is a picture that I have. This was taken up in Winthrop, Washington. And I don't know if you guys can notice this or not, but right now you can see, actually this was taken right after a fire had went through, maybe 3 or 4 days after a fire had went through. So there's a lot of needle litter that had actually recovered and came back onto the ground. So ideally, this to me would be a perfect scenario. You have a homestead in the natural environment, and there has been some reasonable protection there. The home is kind of hardened. If you kind of look at it, the only vulnerable thing they have is the deck. But that fire was able to just kind of work its way around the house and move on. This, by the way, happened without any fire suppression resources at the time on there. So either luck or just good forestry practices and FireWise implementation helped save this house right here. Next slide, please. Okay, same neighborhood. And as you can see, you look at some of these overstory trees here, they have some pretty high scorch heights. So as this fire came through, it did torch out some trees. And it did selectively, knock out some of the tree canopy. The house that's behind that, that has a shake roof. I don't know if that's just good, maybe the wind direction was blowing the embers the right way or what, but you can see that behind in this picture here, there is a concrete rock wall right here on this house that probably helped a lot. And then you have a lot of spatialness within the tree canopies themselves. And the primary driver, as I mentioned earlier, probably in this right here was needle cast, needle litter, and fine fuels. And so with that, your flame heights are going to be a little bit higher. And that's what causes fire to get into the overstory canopies. It is also the fine fuels is also the quickest mover of fire as well. Next slide, please. Okay, so this was taken down the road, and you can see there was some selective tree thinning here. You can see there is some fire in there. One of the things I wanted to point out in this picture right here is that if you look over here on this right side over here, you can see a lot of new regeneration. You got some shrubs, etc. in here. This was the primary driver of this fire. The overstory tree canopy was tall enough to resist a lot of flame impingement, and it was able to not get up into the tree canopy. So this stuff right here is kind of the fine fuels in between these overstory trees is what you want to be paying attention to. Again, it doesn't mean that you have to cut everything down, but just take a objective look at things and say, you know, fire came through here. Would the flame lengths be high enough for it to get into the overstory tree canopy? And if it did, would it be a sustainable event, or would it just torch out one tree and such? It's a really hard question to answer, but these are just some ideas that they're in your wheelhouse, and when you're out and thinking about sustainable thinning and then working with your neighbors and coming up with a plan. Next slide. So I included this picture right here because it's got you know, some slope, and the fire had actually burned through that area too as well. And you can see a lot of the shrub component is orange, and there's a lot of needle cast on the ground. And you know, we're looking at second and third generation trees here. You know, they can take some flame impingement, a lot of pine, but they're tall enough to where the fire had actually just kind of moved through there and didn't get into the overstory canopy. Next time there would be a fire that goes through there, hopefully those trees will be a lot bigger. There will be a lot more shading, and the fire will be a lot less intense. And you know, we'll have a sustainable area here that we can work with. And in regards to forest health, you know, it's a complex subject, and you know, fire is an integral part of forest health, and it's just, you know, we got to figure out a way to be able to work with our partners to help to be able to reestablish some of that, so that we don't have some severe intensity fires that really kill out some of these overstory trees and protect our neighborhoods. With that being said, I believe that was my last slide. Is that correct, John?
Yep, I believe so.
Okay, well, I hope that, you know, I provided some quick and brief information for you about that, and it's great to be on the panel. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Jeremiah. Great information and some great photos too. So I want to welcome our next and final panelist for this session, and that is Keith Felachi. Keith, I think you're on. Oh,
I got it. Thank you for the opportunity, everybody, for coming on and being part of this. I'm probably coming at this from a little bit different standpoint, just as a property owner out east on the Middle Fork of the John Day, and someone who's always been interested in ecology, kind of as my second passion, and always been interested in fire ecology. Probably have a little less emphasis on structure protection at our property than what's going on the ground, just because of that background kind of passion that I have. And you'll be able to tell with some of the pictures of this cabin, it was a pre-existing structure on the property. It's not set up well at all for fire. Some of the mitigation that we've tried to do has been to protect that structure, and also to help prepare the land better for the inevitable day when fire does come back to the land. I want to make a point that it was good to see Irene on the call here. This whole process for us started with having her prepare a forest plan for us, And Irene, I hope you'll be happy to hear that we've been really kind of sticking to the plan that you drew out for us. It's been a lot of fun to kind of work through that as the years have gone by. So I guess I'll just kind of talk through these slides. One of the things that I've really enjoyed about having this property, not only helping to take care of the land and hoping to improve the improved forest health and basically just the health of the property itself, has been in doing so by bringing in some neighbors, some friends, and some family to help with some of these little kind of do-it-yourself projects that we've done. So, for example, this is the first time that we did any kind of burning around the property. You can see this is really old, decadent grass. A lot of it is annuals. There's a lot of Italian ryegrass in here. That type of thing. What I had done before we set this fire was we had cut out a lot of the brush that was grown up around the deck of the cabin itself. There was probably 6 to 8 foot wild rose and that type of thing in there. Lots of dogbane, woody shrubs that we knew would carry fire. So this is the first burn we did was actually in the middle of the winter. It was a dry winter. So even though there were some snow patches that you can't see here, there was some snow on the ground, and it made us feel a little safer, even though me and my friend here, let's face it, we're really novices with this. So we just basically tried to do this on our own just to kind of reduce the fuels around the cabin here. And I'm not sure which pictures John has lined up here, but this is what it looked like on our next trip back. Definitely had reduced a lot of the fuels around the cabin itself, and was pretty pleased with the result. One of the things that was really interesting to me, kind of being interested in ecology, is seeing the change in the plant community that resulted from this. What has grown up in its place now that we've done 2 or 3 of these kind of winter burns around the cabin, is that those grasses have been largely replaced by Solomon stars, which are really cool because they stay green pretty much all summer long. And that change kind of occurred over a couple few burns. So it's just been kind of fun to see that change happen. But you can see the cabin, it's all wood. There's a real challenge for landowners like myself who don't live on or near the property, in that when we come out there, we don't want to spend the whole time working. And of course, finances are always a concern. And one of the things we haven't focused on is doing more fireproofing of that change. You can go ahead and move on to the next slide, please, John. We've done several projects. This is one of the things that we had on our list from Irene right out the gate. There is a remnant aspen stand on the property, and it was in just terrible shape when we bought the place. There had been a lot of kind of unfettered cattle grazing. Pardon me 1 second, please. I've got someone trying to contact me. I'm just going to let them know I'm not available.
Okay, I heard you.
Okay, thanks, Alicia.
I thought it was my phone. Okay, fine.
Okay, so we took out a lot of the ingrowth of the pine and juniper that was growing in here, put the fence up. This was done through a cooperative plan with NRCS. And this is just 1 year, I think, or maybe the second year that we had the fence in place, and the aspen have responded beautifully. We have not put fire into the aspen stand. We're just letting them kind of regenerate naturally, and they are responding just fantastically. And next slide, please, John. So yeah, I have had a lot of fun with this. So when we first bought this place, I knew what I wanted to do was to try to improve the property. And I was really proud to have this picture taken. This was the very first juniper that I cut on the property. And between myself with those loppers, actually probably on my 3rd set of loppers now, and chainsaw, and then with again another, we did a 47-acre juniper reduction program through NRCS, have probably removed several thousand juniper off the property now. Here's an example of working with a couple of our neighbors. The picture on the left is an area, little draw on the property where we took out several dozen medium-sized junipers and basically burned them all ourselves. And then the picture on the right is some of the result of the juniper reduction and mule deer winter habitat enhancement project that we did. And you can see some of the trees that were taken down there were quite a bit bigger than what we were able to handle on our own. But here I have my neighbors in there helping with some of the burn piles, and it's been something that's been kind of a relationship building type of thing for us. And next one, and same neighbor. My neighbor's name is Red. It's a very appropriate name for him, but he has been just fantastic, very handy with a chainsaw, has been more than willing to come in and help thin some of these stands out. This shows a remnant stand of ponderosa that was really being overtaken by juniper. And even some of those moderate sized ones we took down and we're managing them on our own. But holy moly, as anybody knows who takes these trees down, what a lot of work it is just to manage a single tree of that size. And next, here we go, again, trying to do a little bit of burning. It's a little bit hard to see in this picture here, but again, here's my neighbor Red, and it's my niece who came out to help us out. I'd love to get my hands on one of those drip torches one of these days, but for the time being, we just use this little torch. What you can't see right where that flame is there's a road there. So there was a natural fire break that we used. We do know where the winds tend to come in the morning and then how they switch in the afternoon. So this was a morning moist burn and using the road as a fire break. But we were able to probably get an acre or maybe 2 acres of burning done on that weekend. Our neighbor just to the east of us also likes to do a little bit of habitat enhancement and burning. He was burning on the same day that we did this road burn. But definitely a winter burn with low fuel loads. And my wife has also pitched in. This is one of the forestry projects we did a little higher up on the project, on the property. Again, this one was just done with my neighbor, cleared out a few of the really sickly pines in there, and we're just doing some of the pile burns just to reduce the fuel load after that was done. And it has been a constant effort. Pretty much every time we go out when it's appropriate to light a fire, we burn piles, because I've got piles on top of my piles just about. And we do like to have a little bit of fun while we're out there. So Beth insisted, hey, we've got this fire going. Let's go ahead and make some fun out of this. So we actually made s'mores that day off of the burn pile. So I don't know if that's the last slide you have there or not, John. So my experience has been a lot of fun and a great learning experience too. Although I've kind of done this on my own to a great degree. Really appreciative to have this series of courses. It's really deepened my understanding of what the issues are and what some of the next steps are to maybe get a more large-scale controlled burn sometime down the road once we get this place in a little bit better shape. So thank you all for the opportunity. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Keith, and thank you to our other panelists as well. So before we get into a panel discussion, we're going to answer some questions, and we'll be joined by all 3 of our panelists. I just want to leave you all with a call to action. So if you're just starting out, start checking things off your to-do list. Listen to these webinars and pick one of these actions and get it done around your home or property. Maybe you're further along and you've already taken some steps, but maybe there's still a couple things you could do. So we have a number of resources and checklists that list a bunch of different items that you could do around your home and in that defensible space zone. Here's one of those checklists that we'll make sure to get on the class website along with all the other resources that we talked about tonight. So with that, I will turn it over to John, and we can start a Q&A session. We have about 15 minutes left, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, that was great. Really appreciate everyone contributing to this. And, the objective here today was just kind of help connect and tell the story a little bit about some opportunities y'all have had on the landscape. So we do have a bunch of questions in here, and I think it'd be useful to talk about. One of the things, I'm going to go back in the presentation right quick. Somebody had asked us in the chat to show that picture Irene had of the siding. So I wanted to kind of put that up here briefly. And Irene, maybe you could just real quickly mention what you saw on this particular situation related to the siding.
Well, obviously, I mean, vinyl siding melts, so that fire came through there. I think the homeowner probably risked his life saving that home. He's on a rural fire department, but so when that siding all melts, you see the wood underneath. It's amazing it didn't burn down. And so, you know, if you're living in a wildland urban interface situation, I would not recommend vinyl siding unless it's something you inherited. You know, if you can change it out, hardy plank siding is good. Of course, you know, I recognize that money is always an issue, but you know, vinyl's not good because it melts. It's plastic. So that was why I showed it, just because it's dramatic.
It is very dramatic and scary that we've opened up now that structure to be more, you know, readily received embers if they were to get through. So making
Absolutely.
sure we have that exterior as buttoned up as possible is really a good key piece there.
Yeah.
Excellent. So let's keep moving on to some of the other questions. Thank you very much on that response. And so this question here asks, I just thinned most of my acreage to 15 feet between bowls. I assume there'll be a regrowth. So we did see some of that, and Jeremiah actually touched on that regrowth thing. I don't know if maybe you want to touch on answering this question, Jeremiah, but basically the question is, how do I treat the regrowth and how soon will it be necessary to do so?
Yeah, I can I can touch base on that. Yeah, regrowth is always going to be a challenge, especially depending on the tree species. Grand fir is an opportunist. It really comes up very quickly. So you're always going to have some hard work, and then you have to follow it up with some treatment. Objectively, what I would like to see in the future is a little bit more prescribed fire on private property. And I think that would be the cheapest and cost efficient and probably the most reasonable way to do that. And if that is not an option, maintaining the landscape and just harvesting your trees, your new generation trees, or cutting them and keeping them pruned down and thinned down, and picking and choosing which ones you want to promote. You know, if you have a nice larch out there that's, you know, a little sprout that's coming up, that's, you know, a new generation of trees that you want to encourage to grow. It's not going to hurt anything. You know, it's just it's the continuity of fuels that you want to pay attention to and manage.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for that. And I think additionally, it does depend on when you're going to have to do those re-entries. Some parcels may be longer space in between your mechanical or prescribed fire implementation to help keep those fuels down. So, you know, it's going to depend a little bit on your specific area that you're in, but revisiting that before things get too expensive and too time intensive is a really good way to keep up with things. So, you know, look at that, you know, 10 to 20 year window potentially. In some areas, it might be much less than that, depending on the growth. So, and that kind of goes to this next question related to, I'm working to get rid of needles, leaf debris, and other debris on the site, and trying to decide between the best ways of disposal. Is it burning it in a pile or in a barrel, chipping or shredding? And what recommendations or suggestions do you consider? And Keith, I don't know if you might want to mention how you've been handling some of those opportunities, kind of being back away from opportunities to haul off of your site.
Yeah, we haven't really hauled much of anything off site. It's all pretty much been burned. And we've got burn piles, burn spots in various locations. One right close to the cabin that I haul needles down to and burn every year, or we just burn them when we kind of burn around the cabin itself. I've never been, I hadn't spent that much time in Ponderosa country, but my goodness, the needle cast every year is just tremendous. And it seems like every time I go out, I have to rake or sweep off the roof and gather up the needles and get them away from the cabin. You know, certain times a year more than others, obviously, but yeah, everything has either been burned or, you know, we haven't had a chipper on there, but and then some of the trees that we've taken down have gone into the wood stove, which is always kind of fun.
Oh, it's great. Yeah, I think there's a lot of ways to do your fuels treatment, and it really just depends on what's going to work best in your given situation. Some people are able to put them in the trailer and haul them off to a recycle yard or something of that nature. But utilizing fire is one good way. You can do a lot with a chipper in a weekend if you get all your piles set up ahead of time. And so there's definitely a lot of different ways. And remember that some of this material being left on site is a good thing for recycling of the nutrients when it's moved away from the home and when it's in an appropriate location.
Yeah, John, one thing that I would add too is to consider, where you're located and what either the city ordinances, county ordinances, burn windows and things like that. Obviously, burning might be cheaper than renting a chipper, but if you don't have that burn window or if you don't have that time to burn those piles or in a burn barrel, then maybe the chipper would be an efficient way to do it.
Yeah, great point. And make sure you get the proper permits and permissions to do those burns or whatever you're going to be doing on your parcels. So great. Well, let's touch on this next question, and maybe Jeremiah, you'd be interested in helping us, and maybe all y'all and Irene as well answer this. What about shaded fuel breaks and productive west side forests, retaining a dense overstory and focusing on understory fuels and ladder fuels? Opening west side forest produces such rapid understory growth and high maintenance fuels. We agree with that. And Jeremiah, what do you have to contribute to that?
That's a hard question to answer. I'm a believer in shaded fuel breaks in certain applications. A lot of that has to do with overstory. You're talking just old growth trees that provide shade the ground and keep the ground from being heated from radiant heat from the sun and more receptive to extreme fire behavior. So the idea of a shaded fuel break makes a lot of sense. Where the shaded fuel break can go wrong, depending on the tree species, for example, like a pine stand, where you have a shaded fuel break with a lot of needle litter. If the pines are over old growth pines, generally it will just move right through there, and they'll take the heat. If you got a lot of timber crowding and mixed diversity of conifers, then you can have some isolated torching that gets into the canopy. And then that could take out your shaded fuel break. So there is no real straight one-shot answer. Looks
like we might have lost you there, but we got the good stuff there. Hopefully that's not just me. Irene, might you have anything to add to that?
No, as Jeremiah said, there's, if you're going to choose to live places like that, like Keith and Beth living out in the pine forest, I mean, that's what goes with it. So there is no magic answer. I do think, like Jeremiah, that shaded fuel breaks are of value, but everything grows, and so just it goes with the program.
Yeah, and I think like Keith mentioned in the chat there about having a plan, understanding what you're dealing with, when you're going to do things, how you're going to do those, and thinking about those ahead of time with a longer range window as to how you're going to approach all this is really valuable. So work on getting that plan put together and follow that plan, and understand that plan's a living document and has some adaptability built in so that you can learn as you go and make those adjustments. So yeah, that's great. Appreciate that.
Yeah, I agree with that. And to remember that east side forests, where Keith and Beth are, is really marginally forest. It's forest on top, and it kind of transitions down into open grassland. We've had a lot of encroachment of not only juniper, but pine. Whereas on your west side forests are, many of those are extremely productive. So it's helpful to have somebody who is pretty knowledgeable help you work through your objectives and tailor your plan to what you want to do. So
yeah, that's great. Thank you. All right, looks like we're doing okay on time. We can maybe go for another question or two. So this is a great question. So we get a lot of questions related to post-fire recovery, and this question's dealing with that. And so asking about suggestions on how to replant after a fire. We've had to take out a lot of trees after the holiday farm fire, but as replant, those new trees are small. So how do we balance the need to plant trees with keeping ladder fuels down? I think this is a fantastic question. And Jake, maybe you might have something to contribute to this. You're pretty dialed in on some of these things.
Well, yeah, it depends on the situation too. If the overstory was completely lost and this is a whole new cohort of trees being planted, of course, there's going to be some horizontal and vertical continuity of those fuels as those seedlings are growing up. But as that stand grows and eventually that stand is treated, depending on your management objectives, and then you can start thinking about how to break up those fuels so those trees don't compete with each other and so they're not at risk for fire. So it's kind of tricky. It really depends on the forest type and what that structure, how many age classes are present and things like that. But regeneration is going to be important to establish that new cohort, but balancing that with reducing fire risk too can be tricky. And it really depends on what your management objectives are and how to kind of balance reducing that fire risk.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, one of the things we've been talking about recently is how do we set our forests and our stands and our land, our home, our landscapes up for being receptive to fire, not for today or for tomorrow, but for the next, pretty good portion of time. And so let's think 20, 30 years down the road. How big are those trees going to get? What are they going to look like? I've done a lot of projects where the landscape was beautiful when it was first planted, but trees grow, plants grow. And then everything's touching one another and we got to come in and thin that stuff out. So think about, where do you want this stand of trees or this landscape to be in 5 or 10 or 20 or 30 years for that matter? It might help reduce the maintenance you have, and additionally might provide the stage to set properly to be receptive if a fire were to be there without having to panic and do a lot right in the moment. So there are some really good guides on spacing and thinking about those things and resources that we have for that. And then just think about, what do we want to do and what could potentially happen in the next 20 to 30 years. Let's set this thing up for motion in the right direction moving forward. All right, so I think we're looking pretty good on questions here. We always get questions related to biochar and slash related treatments. We've done a ton of different webinars on slash mitigation and slash treatment opportunities. Actually, Jacob's working on a whole bunch of stuff related to carbon and biochar that we're going to hopefully have out for y'all in the not too distant future. But yeah, there are tons of opportunities. And remember that producing biochar is, consuming, materials in the absence of oxygen. And so it's very different than just burning those into the, in oxygenated atmospheres. So there are a lot of ways to do that. The big recommendations on if you are burning slash regular is to keep those piles dry. Don't make the piles too tight, but keep them condensed reasonably. Don't put huge materials in on the outside or, in the wrong place on your pile. Construct your pile appropriately. Keep them of a reasonable size. Burn them on proper days. Consider covering them even if you live in a place where there might be some moisture coming through and you're trying to hit that right window for your permit and everything. So there are a lot of tips. And if you literally type in slash treatment OSU extension, you'll find all sorts of good resources that we have available. And actually, Ariel Cowan did a presentation not too long ago related to slash mitigation, had some really good tips on that. So take a look at those resources we have. I think we're about able to wrap up for now. Jake, you want to finish us up here?
No, I'm going to turn it over to Carrie to close us out.
Great. Thank you, guys. Thank you, John and Jake, so much. And of course, to the panelists who made this webinar happen today. The panelists' personal accounts have been so tremendously impactful. So thank you. And thank you all for joining us. We recognize that some of you are still recovering from a previous wildfire season. And we appreciate you tuning into these webinars to get yourselves, your family, and your communities prepared for the next wildfire season. A reminder that this webinar has been recorded, and I will send a follow-up email with all the resources, including the recording, the Q&A links, you name it, I will send it. And please share out with your family, your neighbors, neighbors. You get the point. So next week on December 8th, same time, noon to 1, please consider joining us for a presentation on prescribed fire. That's all I have today. So stay safe, everyone, and see you in about a week on Wildfire Wednesdays, Fire Aware, Fire Prepared. Thank you.